Aria Salafranca has published three collections of poetry and a book of short stories. She's an experienced writing tutor and editor of fiction, poetry, nonfiction, and academic theses. She has an MA in creative writing, focusing on the novella, and a BA in psychology and African literature, and has received the Delrose, Sanlam, and Sala Awards for her writing. Hi, Aria. Thanks very much for taking the time to chat to me today. So I wanted to get to know you a little bit and introduce you a little bit more to some of our writers. And as part of that process, I know you are fairly new to working at Now Novel, but I just wanted to get an idea of what you do or how you help people.
Okay. All right. Well, I tutor in all sorts of things. My interest is in all sorts of different genres and different types of writing. My interest, I'm a writer myself. I'm a poet. I'm a short story writer. I've written novellas. I'm writing a novel. I've done travel writing, travel essays, and I used to work at the Sunday Independent as a lifestyle editor. So I'll say with journalism and lifestyle journalism probably the most. And how I can help people is with combining all that knowledge and combining my passion for some of those genres. As I say, I write in all sorts of genres and I read in all sorts of genres. So I bring a breadth of experience to the process.
Yes, I would be hesitant to try and understand how many thousands of words you've written over the last couple of years, but I would imagine it's quite a few.
You know, let me just tell you, I keep diaries, and I always said to myself, "Oh, I don't know if I could write a novel. It's so long." And then I looked at how many words I'd written in the diary for 9 months, and it was something like 90,000 words. So I always say to people, if you can keep a diary and you can keep it consistently, you can write a novel, because a novel is, well, a general novel is 75 plus words. But there you go.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I need to. Well, I mean, I write a journal, but mine is pretty dry stuff. So I'm not sure if that would be interesting for everyone else. But at least it's good to know that maybe one day I have the facility.
There you go.
So you have a as you said, you've got a background in poetry, creative writing, lifestyle, and journalism. How do you think all of these different practices complement each other and help you in your writing?
Well, it depends what I'm writing. Well, for example, if I remember all the interviews I've done through the years with as a lifestyle journalist, you you start tuning into the way people speak. You know, you start understanding that sometimes males speak a little bit differently to females. I'm being very generalized here. I don't mean to be, but I'm not saying males and females are different, but there are differences in the way they speak. There are differences in the way different people speak. And your ears start tuning in. And that's a very useful facility to have when you come to writing a novel or creative nonfiction or short stories, because so often one of the problems is that when you start writing dialogue, all the dialogue sounds the same. It all sounds obviously like you. But if you've had that experience, or even if you go to a coffee shop and just sit there and eavesdrop on people, you'll notice how different people use, let's say, a hey at the end of the sentence, and other people don't use a hey. And that's something useful to bring into your dialogue writing. So to listen. So that's how my journalism and my lifestyle writing has complemented it. And then I once went off to Madikwe Game Reserve with a friend of mine. It was a press trip. And we were very lucky to witness an elephant mourning. I mean, it was a sad occasion, but we saw the elephant, and they talk about how the elephant actually mourns its dead, and they walk around it and they trumpet. And I took that and I put a little bit into of the travel writing that I did do from that story, but I also then used it later on in a novella that I wrote. And I was able to expand it and to put more feeling into it, because the kind of lifestyle journalism that you do, sometimes you can't put so much feeling into it. So that's how experiences, I suppose, feed into your own writing. And experiences can be a springboard and and write them down, because you never know when you want more information about something and you can't remember. But that's, as we say, that's where keeping a diary can also be very useful and valuable. And it's also, sorry to go back to diaries, they're also very useful for the whole dialogue story. When you keep a diary and you write down conversations between your friends, people, etc., again, you notice how different conversations can be and how people speak differently and the words that they use and how that feeds in.
It sounds like your diary is sort of an area where you collate a lot of information or things that you might want to use at a later stage. What's the process? How do you go about putting it in? How do you know what to put into your diary, and then how do you know when and what to take out of your diary? Because 90,000 words over 9 months, it must be quite hard to find the relevant piece or go back and reference it, if that makes sense.
It is. Well, first of all, because I write it by hand, I write it with a fountain pen on the most beautiful paper, Clairefontaine and Rhodia paper, and I like the feeling of writing it by hand. It's, besides poetry, it's the only thing I do write by hand. And I've had this conversation with myself about putting it digitally so that I can actually search it. But
Yes.
so far, this conversation has not gone anywhere. There's been no resolution. So I think when I come to the fiction, I don't consciously think, okay, I want to write about an elephant mourning, for example. It just comes. It seems to fit that particular story. And when I do want to go back into my diary to reference something that happened or to rewrite about it or use it, it's a bit of a difficult process finding things. But I've got a rough idea that this happened in 1992, for example, so that I just have to kind of whip through the pages for that. And of course, different years produce different lengths of diaries. Sometimes when you're going through a really bad emotional kind of time, a breakup or something like that, then you can write your 90,000 words, and probably a lot of those 90,000 words are just the same old, because you're going through a process, a problem at work, or a year-long problem at work, or whatever it might be. So my diary does feed very much into my writing. In terms of practicing, that's a huge thing that people should try and do, is to practice your writing, and diary writing allows you to practice. And it also allows you to practice without thinking of eventual publication. So you're not thinking, whoops, I better go edit that because that's a little bit awkward and a little bit lumpy. You just write. And it's incredible how it becomes a practice that's, it's like piano playing. You've got to practice your scales every day, or whatever. Often you practice your scales. And without that, the fluidity of the playing doesn't come out in the final performance or on stage. So it's a very useful habit. A lot of people can't keep diaries and they hate the thought of keeping diaries, and I totally understand. But I've got ideas about, keep a postcard to yourself, write a postcard to yourself once a week or something like that. It's not as daunting as keeping a diary on pages in a beautiful book or on beautiful pages.
Here's my diary. I mean, mine is not as fancy, and I don't use nice pages.
Let's get mine. My diaries change from time to time, and I used to write them in beautiful books, and then I would, when they finished, I would start the next one. So if it was, let's say, August, I'd start the next one. But a couple of years ago, I decided to try keeping yearly ones. So they all start now on the 1st of January and end on the 31st of December. So it's a Rhodia notebook, and I've got this leather cover.
Okay.
And this is my blank page. That's where I say what volume it is at the end of the year, and there we go. That's a page.
Okay. Your handwriting looks very neat. Also, it looks.
Fountain pen helps.
Yes, I used to use a fountain pen. Now you've somewhat inspired me to. I'm going to Google those books and see if I can get a little less of my sort of scratchy stream of consciousness writing that I'm using. But yes, enough about
whatever works for you.
Indeed. So moving a little bit, you talked about your background in poetry and having published poetry. I'm not a poetry reader, but which book of poetry, or how would you guide someone who isn't a poetry reader into poetry?
Um, I would say look at anthologies
Okay.
rather than buying individual collections at first. An anthology would guide you to some of the different poets that you might then want to look up. So there's South African anthologies of writing, there's, all over the world they would have like, in the UK, you have the best forward poetry, and that is the forward book of poetry, I think it is, and that's published. And in the US, there's a fantastic series called The Best American, and one of those is The Best American Poetry. So that gives you a whole wide view of different poetry from that year, published in different journals and so on. The Best American also has the Best American Essays, the Best American Short Stories, the Best American Essays, I mentioned, travel writing, the Best American science writing.
At the risk of this being show and tell, I have the Best American comics, which is maybe a little bit less.
So you know all about the series.
Yeah, it's great. It gives you a nice snack into what's going on, and they're nicely curated, and yeah, it's very interesting process.
I think that for me would be the best way of people getting into poetry, because sometimes doing poetry at school either kills it for people or it does make them more interested in writing or reading poetry. But so often the poetry at school, or the way we were taught it, I mean, it differs from place to place, generation to generation, is the old-fashioned poetry that is, the language is difficult. And you've got young kids of 9, 10, 11. Try and introduce them to more contemporary poetry. So sometimes that does kill poetry for people. And there's this idea that it's so very, very difficult. And yes, you find that kind of obscure poetry with the meaning shrouded in mist and all of that. But there's a lot of poetry that isn't like that. So pick up an anthology and
Great.
like a poem, go past, go do another one. Read a poem a night for a month. That's 30 poems. Wow, that's quite a lot. That gives you quite a wide variety of.
Okay, I'm gonna have a look for something in the Best American series and see if I can find myself some poetry to get involved with. What has editing other people's stories taught you about writing, and how would you apply that to your own writing?
Well, it's taught me sometimes factual information. I edited a thesis a couple of years ago on airlines, which is totally outside my idea of anything. So that taught me a lot about that. Editing and cutting is what really is where some of the lessons come in, because you learn how much can be cut, how much there is that is extraneous, that also editing in terms of cutting out the first paragraph or even the first page when you talk about creative writing. It's amazing how if you cut that out, you write into the story. And I've learned that through my writing, and also through seeing what people are doing in their writing and how to change that. That was my cat going outside the door there. So it's taught me information. It's taught me about a world out there and things that I don't know very much about. And it's also taught me how different people create stories, and how you have to edit their work, but you have to let their vision live. And that's quite a difficult thing to do, instead of just going in with a sledgehammer and making it all the way you would want it to do. So you have to be quite sensitive, and you almost have to live in their story as much as they've lived in their story. I'm talking about non-fiction, of course, not an academic thesis, which is a totally different kind of editing. And I've edited all sorts of things, from PhD and master's theses to creative nonfiction to short stories to, I've just finished a novella this week, which was wonderful. I was in the Kalahari. I was right in Johannesburg where I live. And I was in the
Yeah.
Kalahari headed, with this novella, which was lovely. And it's a real window on other people's worlds.
Yeah. I like what you said about the sensitivity required in order to not impose your worldview or your structures on someone, and that's I can imagine that's quite a tightrope at times, because you have this wealth of knowledge and how things should be done, and other people may not have that as much, but part of their naivety or part of their voice comes from the way that they communicate, which may not be perfect all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
So there it's to smooth things over, to also suggest, I mean, when you suggest a story and how it isn't working, for example, or how perhaps put chapter 1 should be chapter 9 and chapter 9 should be chapter 2, how the story develops, developmental editing, it also teaches me, because I think, that's that story of mine, maybe I should apply the same thing. So it's all very useful.
yeah. So you were in the Kalahari last week with someone else's novella. I think you're working on a novella yourself at the moment. A novel, sorry, fully fledged. Sorry. So
a series of novellas for my MA in creative writing.
Okay.
And that's when I worked on my novellas.
I mean, can you give us a sneak peek, or should we wait back and wait and circle back? I mean, are you happy to talk about what you're working on, or is it under wraps for the time being?
It's not under wraps. I won't obviously give the whole story away.
No, of course.
I wouldn't want to write it. I'm always working on a few different things. I mean, I've got ideas for short stories which are sitting at the back of my mind while I get on with the novel. It's a novel that's set in 2 time zones. So it's set in the early 1920s. I haven't quite settled on whether it's 1922, but we'll see. And then it's also set in the present day. So it's set in, let's say, the 2020s. And in the 2020 section, it's set in an area of South Africa called Magaliesburg. And it's set on a sort of like a holiday estate, but people also do live there. The real name of it is Utopia, which I quite like, but I don't want to use Utopia. So I'm calling it Shangri-La, for reasons which will become more apparent in the novel as I go. So the present day is there. And it's a woman who is called by another woman to write a biography of her aunt and her aunt's life. And she's got some information about her aunt, but she doesn't have it all. So this woman, the main character, has to write and has to imagine as well. But interspersed with this is the 1920s, where the where the woman's aunt, when the woman's aunt was living. So we have that. What I'm trying to do in this novel also is to look at biography and how to write biography. So I'm bringing those strands of biography into it. But it's more than just how to write biography. There are parallels between the woman now and the woman's life in the 1920s, and I'm bringing those together. And I'm using a little bit of letters and some diaries, because I'm using what a biographer would have available to them, which would be those kind of things. Photographs, postcards, I'm going to include all of that. And also the different voices of some of the characters, especially from the past. So I'm playing with it, I'm working into it, I'm researching, and that for me is the most difficult part, because I have to go find 1920s newspapers, and I have to go to a library in town, in our downtown CBD, and go find newspapers and use them on microfiche, or whatever they might have. Which, I mean, I remember using microfiche 100 years ago, and it's not as nice as having it online. But I can't find South African newspapers online. So
no, I can imagine it might be quite an
history and all sorts of things. So.
Sounds fascinating. How far are you through it?
I'm not that far. I'm 10,000 words into it.
Okay.
So it's the beginning is over, and
Okay.
I'm not sure how many words it's going to be. I'm going to let it dictate.
We always ask, or there's always a discussion about whether people are plotters or pantsers, in terms of, do you have it all plotted out, or are you a seat of the pants kind of person in terms of how you're writing? My assumption is that you have a fairly clear idea about where at least the first draft is going.
Yes, I'm actually not a plotter, but I found with this novel that I couldn't begin until I had an idea. So I've got, chapter one, chapter two, whatever, written down very roughly.
Okay.
And I'm fine with the story taking me where the story has to go. With short stories, it's different. I don't plot a short story. I have an idea in my mind and I know kind of where I want to go with the short story, and then it takes me there. But I found with the longer piece, I needed to have a mind map. I needed to have something to look at, and I'm glad I've got that. So that's helped a lot with writing it.
In some respects, I would think that short stories are actually more difficult because you have to create the character, you have to create the tension. There's a resolution with the plot, and everything has to happen in a fairly short space of time. You don't have the luxury of a longer arc to deal with things. But that's what I think maybe plotting would make more sense, or I don't know. It's just an interesting way of looking at things. What do you find as the biggest struggles that first time writers encounter, and how would you propose that they get over those struggles, or how would you help them to get over those struggles?
I think perhaps a lack of confidence is a problem, a lack of knowing how to begin, and thinking they've never done this, and they're biting off, they're trying to eat an elephant. And I mean, how do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant, tiny bit by tiny bit. So I think how I would help people is to have the confidence that you have a story to tell. Otherwise, you wouldn't be wanting to sit at your computer and tell the story. So there you go. You already have a story to tell. You just have to tell the story, and take it slowly. Take it bit by bit. Don't think that you want to write a novel and it's going to take you a year and this is such a big long commitment, and how are you ever going to finish it? Will it be good enough? First of all, forget about whether it's going to be good enough or not going to be good enough. Don't even think about that. Put that editor part, put that judgmental, critical part of you away. You can bring that part of you away back after a year or whenever you've written your novel, and when you do need to rewrite your novel or redraft it, you can bring that part of you back. But have the confidence in yourself that you have the story that you want to tell, and that it's a story that's important to you. And if it's important to you, it's probably going to be important to many other people. It will resonate with them. The other thing is to write what you want to write. Don't think that because there are novels about serial killers coming out this year that now you have to find a story about a serial killer because this is what's going on and this is obviously popular, etc., etc. If you don't want to write about serial killers, then don't. Write what is your passion. Write that story that won't die, that keeps on living. Look at the characters that won't let you alone at 2 a.m. and come along knocking on your door and say, come write us. Write your passion, and that'll come out into your book.
That's great. I love that. I think that's actually a perfect epigram or way to end our interview. So thanks, Aria. And I'll remind everyone to write their passion from now on. Thanks for your time.
Okay, excellent. Thanks a lot.